Good afternoon. I'm David McCormick, Artistic Director of Early Music Access Project, or EMAP. I'm here with Loren Ludwig of EMAP and Colonial Williamsburg historical interpreters Jamar Jones and Pritchett. Early Music Access Project and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation are partnering to bring you this afternoon's virtual event, Expanding the Narrative, Centering Black Music at Colonial Williamsburg. This episode will remain available on the Colonial Williamsburg Facebook page and will be soon available on the EMAP YouTube channel. This episode is the second in the ongoing Expanding the Narrative series from Early Music Access Project, created to center voices of color in the study and performance of early American music.
David and I opened today's episode with an interview of actor Jamar Jones and violinist Jenny Edenborn of CW's Governor's Music, collaborators on The Music That Binds, a theatrical interpretation of the relationship between Thomas Jefferson and his enslaved manservant Jupiter Evans. This segment ends with a behind-the-scenes look at the show through rehearsal footage of a key scene. And The Music That Binds is going to be running at CW through June 22nd on Tuesday evenings, weather permitting. So there are at least 3 opportunities to check it out before the end of this run. Following that episode, we're going to hear from banjo and fiddle player Wayne Hill, who provides a demonstration of instrumental folk traditions that reveal the centrality of African and African-American musical influence. Then we'll hear from Loren Pritchett, who was a founder of Colonial Williamsburg's Black Music Program in 1979. Loren offers up a history of that program and a look at the related musical traditions that he has spent decades interpreting.
So we'll be back live with you at the end of this episode for a live Q&A session in which Jamar and Loren will answer the questions that you provide us. So please, throughout the episode, in the comments section, leave us your questions so that we'll have some questions to answer at the end of the episode. We're here with 2 interpreters from Colonial Williamsburg that are part of the program, The Music That Binds. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about that program.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jamar Jones. I'm a member of the actor-interpreter unit here at Colonial Williamsburg, and I'm a theater artist based in Central Virginia, and I have the pleasure of representing Jupiter, or you might have heard of him as Jupiter Evans, in the program, The Music That Binds, and I'm also one of the writers and creators for that program.
Thanks, Jamar. My name's Jenny Edenborn. I'm part of the music ensemble that works here full-time. We're called the Governor's Music at Colonial Williamsburg, and we collaborated with Jamar and Kurt Smith on the writing The Music That Binds, which is kind of a combination concert and play, really. It's an interesting combination. It's not a musical, and it's not really a presentation with music. It's it takes a concert and it puts it into a context of the personalities of Thomas Jefferson and Jupiter.
What was sort of the impetus for creating this program?
Yeah, well, I'll start, Jenny. So, because I honestly think I was maybe the last person to come into the fold with it, because my understanding is the Governor's Music Ensemble, and I'm going to toot you all's horn because, they're brilliant. They really are brilliant. And they had this great concept and they've done so much research of gathering the music from that Thomas Jefferson listened to, that he experienced, that they loved. And they really had this idea of presenting a piece that was a reflection of Jefferson's life. And I have to certainly mention my collaborator and friend, Kurt Smith, who portrays Thomas Jefferson, who also was integral to this process in creating this piece. They were in communication with Kurt about having some sort of program for Colonial Williamsburg in the evenings, reflecting that. But then what happened, they said, well, it would be a great idea to bring in Jupiter. And for those watching, if you've never heard of Jupiter, Jupiter was for roughly 30 years the enslaved personal manservant to Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson and Jupiter both were born in 1743 on Shadwell Plantation. So these two are born in the same year, grow up together, and Jupiter does serve him. He travels with him, dresses him, attends him, was here in Williamsburg with him. So all of those things, we said we would like to hear from Jupiter also in the piece. And so what did we have? We had the governor's music with all of these endless, beautiful songs that they knew Jefferson had, and they could tie them to different places. They had just these songs. Then you had two actors who portrayed Jefferson and Jupiter. Now what do you do? So based off of that, Kurt and I, in communication with Governor's Music Ensemble, we really began to say, okay, what is the journey we want to take them on? What do we want to show? And we began to build scenarios around the music and have different events of both of these men's lives be tied in and have them correlate with certain songs. And we really weave the songs in with their personal journeys to tell the story. So that's how it really is. It's really a conversation between music and the words of Jefferson and Jupiter in our piece to just really have the opportunity to show how music can influence it. Now, I'll be forthright, Jupiter, we don't have documentation to say that he was a musician, but we certainly can infer that music was heavily embedded into his daily life, and certainly while he served as Jefferson. And so that's a pretty large event way to explain it. So we have an hour-long, as Jenny said, play, concert, theatrical, musical presentation to share. That's how it came to be.
Yeah, I think we've done programs where we incorporate Jefferson only because so much is known about Jefferson's music. He had a music collection, which he meticulously wrote down what he had in his library. And we know he wrote about how important music was in his life. And we know that he played the violin. And there's a lot of information. And a member of our group, Carol Stedman, who's our soprano, actually was the impetus for the idea to contact Jamar, because she said it would be interesting to try to explore the lives of these two men. And that's really what they are on stage. They're two men. They're two men who are equal, and they're up there. And, it's very interesting to see them as human beings that are equal in their appreciation of music and the way that music moves them. And although we have as Jamar said, we have so little information about particularly what music Jupiter possibly experienced in his life, or if he played an instrument or whatever. But we working with Jamar and Kurt, they had a lot of emotional stuff that they could explore, and then we brought the music into that according to different. But we follow a bit of a timeline, don't we?
It's absolutely a timeline, and also it's a journey of I think we always hear music is a universal language, right? And music, whether 18th century or today, there's appreciation, but we really also, in our piece, through our scripted work, examine that idea of the binding of music, because while you are hearing from both of these two people, one is enslaved to the other, right? Yeah. And what are the ramifications of that, and what were the implications for Jupiter having to be there to experience, Jefferson finding his love of music and doing things. We have on record Jupiter going around in the city of Williamsburg while they were here, literally purchasing fiddle strings for Jefferson on multiple occasions. So how did the music impact Jupiter? Because his experience with the music, that through at least what Jefferson was experiencing, was based off of, in service to Jefferson, right? He was attending him when he was probably enjoying these concerts. So you have this very interesting dichotomy right there of taking it in and experiencing it. So I think that's something
that's important. When I say that, what strikes me in the play is, for instance, there's a part where Jefferson has lost his wife, and he has a lot of emotional pain. And Jupiter has a lot of emotional pain as well. And they're up there, and Jefferson is kind of being a little tone deaf to Jupiter's problems. But his problems have an equal depth to those that Jefferson is experiencing. So the audience sees that, they see that this is a human being with a lot of painful experience in losing loved ones in his life. And then, so we bring the music in different ways too.
In terms of the music that was selected for this program, is the Monticello Music Library sort of well represented in this program?
Yes, I think when we get to France, we include some pieces that he wrote about that he heard at Le Concert Spirituel when he was in France. So we include a piece by a French composer, Duport, a little snippet of a cello piece. We include some African tunes which are republished in a Scottish book in the 1780s called the James Aird Collection. These are tunes that are from Virginia. And we include some stuff that takes off of sort of comical situation, like, for example, in the early mention of music, Jupiter is reminiscing about hearing Jefferson play scales when he's learning the violin. So we composed a montage of different scales from the Gemignani book of how to play the violin, which Jefferson did have in his library. I guess I would say yes to that question.
It's fascinating the sort of tension that you all are talking about. On the one hand, music being kind of universal and sort of equalizing in the richness of experience, and then at the same time, these men were having such different sort of roles and agency in the historical place that they were. And I wonder, Jamar, if you would just sort of talk a little bit more about what it was like to sort of creatively imagine this person, Jupiter, kind of having these musical experiences in parallel with Jefferson, but that would have been so different in certain ways.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the one thing just in general, especially portraying and really trying to really touch into really speak to the humanity of these individuals, these enslaved individuals. And a lot of times you don't have so much information, but the one thing we know, right, as simple as this sounds, that they were there. And so that is one thing that helped lead me into creatively trying to figure out what is Jupiter's take on this? Because, you can look in so many historical documents and sometimes things are said and a lot of times things are not said. But even in the moments where things are not said, we know they're there. So that means they're seeing, they're hearing everything. And so that was my first entryway into really trying to craft Jupiter's perspective on this because, while we might not know his personal thoughts, Jupiter was here with Jefferson the entire time. So that means he had to have some sort of opinion, but how do you begin to formulate that and what was it? And so a lot of times I use some things that we know about Jefferson and Jupiter's dynamic. We know that there was some contention between them. We know, there's a historical document that says there was a conversation that Jupiter and Jefferson had, and people had never seen Jefferson so impassioned in this way. So, that lets me know Jupiter probably had a very strong voice and was willing to say things. So he probably, therefore, then I take some creative license. He might say, I like this sort of song. I don't like this, this, that, and the other. But also, I begin to think about what his life was like post-serving Jefferson. He always was serving, but in a different capacity. He wasn't a manservant. He went on to become the head of the stables at Monticello beyond 1775, and he ran the head of the stables. We also know Jupiter was a stone cutter, so he was a man with his hands working with the animals. And so I then began to think about the idea about the music that is in the world. He might not have been playing an instrument or a fiddle, but horses are going to clank, 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 gallop. He has to make sure things on the hooves are good, putting the saddles on and in the reins, all those sorts of things, dealing with carriages. That's sound. There's music. There's a rhythm, right? Jupiter was living on Mulberry Road with his wife, Sook, and he did have 3 children, but ultimately only one lives to adulthood, his son, Philip Evans. But he's living on Mulberry Road with all these other enslaved people. So on Mulberry Road, that's where all the production and things are happening down in Monticello. So you have the nailery, you have the people in the fields working. And we know historically enslaved people would use songs, right, to keep rhythm, because you don't want one person working too fast or one person working too slow. You don't want to work yourself into an early grade. It's a pace, it's a system that they had to create to survive the institution of slavery and get through together. And so I began to think, what would that have been like day in and day out for this enslaved man who has traveled with the owner of this plantation, who does all this work, who has one of the columns that Jupiter designed is still standing on the front portico at Monticello to this day. And what does that, when he's stone cutting, what sort of sounds is that? Because, he might not have been thinking about that, but that is musical. There's musicality in his work. There's musicality in the way that he's creating and crafting. And so that really was my entry point. For Jupiter's idea of speaking about music, it's just life, right? It's movement, it's rhythm and everything. And Kurt, my colleague who we write together, Kurt was very open to that, and we wanted to embed those things in the script and in the text of what we shared. So that really was my way of speaking about that. So you hear a lot of in my dialogue in the piece, I'm literally using musical phrases and musical things, even when it comes to we play with this idea of bullfrogs, because they were boys growing up, and so we have this bit about them catching bullfrogs, and of course the bullfrogs sort of ribbit and croak, and we say that there's kind of like an opera to them singing, but and we might not know those things for sure, but again, that's referencing the idea of they were living and they were just experiencing, and we were seeing and acknowledging the idea of music within nature and within their lives that way. So.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, Jamar, what it's like to do this on a kind of a daily basis, right? You interpret both free and enslaved Black historical figures kind of on a daily basis, and I have to imagine that comes with sort of a heavy weight. And I'd love to hear a bit about your experience doing that.
Yeah. It is. It's the truth is it's very unpredictable. It's unpredictable because the world is unpredictable. But this history is what it is, right? And so, one, I will say I'm grateful, and I do not take it lightly that I have the opportunity to represent these people. Oftentimes, the first time guests might encounter me, it might be their first time even hearing about the enslaved story or the perspective or encountering someone. And the thing that I find a lot of beauty in is the fact that, when these people walk away, that they can't say that they've never heard of this one individual. Just even referencing Jupiter, one story I like to say, a young girl came up, and her mother and the young girl herself was maybe about 11. She was saying she knew everything about Thomas Jefferson. She's written endless book reports on Thomas Jefferson. She knew his life. And I said, that's great. Have you ever heard of Jupiter? She said, I don't know who that is. And I sat there and I told her, and then I sent her to see the program, and then therefore she does know. So in those moments, I love that. However, it also is, it can be challenging. It's no secret. This past year in our country, recently now, there's a lot of racially motivated things that are happening, injustices, inequities, and it's draining. This is the truth, and it is, some days coming to put on the persona of enslaved person. I'm thankful that is not my life. However, dealing with the public, sometimes people don't want to hear this story. There have been times where I've portrayed Jupiter, and people have walked away using some very choice words that I wouldn't repeat now, because what I would say is they are being challenged. And that is good. I love that, because even if you walk away bothered or upset, that's something that you have to unpack within you. And you know what I will say, the one thing that I say I can understand is because a lot of times growing up, people don't, there's a very specific angle of history that is presented, right? But the truth is, speaking about slavery is not erasing the efforts of someone else. It's telling the truth, right? And that's my job. My job here is to help you see a complete picture, because the truth is, in the city where I usually portray most of these people, Williamsburg, during the American Revolution, over half of the city, 52% of the population was of African descent, and the majority of those people were enslaved. And that was a time when America was attempting to deem itself to be America. So that is completely intrinsic to the story, and it is literally, that is the full piece. And, I tell people all the time, most times people are excited to hear these stories and learn about these individuals. But even those times when they're not, I tell people, our work here is to tell you the history as it is, because, my urge and my charge for people is take a moment, explore all the people that you do know and that there are endless books and information on, but pause and think about everybody else who was around them. Think of not only the enslaved men, women, and children, the wives, the women that were in the space, Native people, all the folks who were traveling around, that there's not this endless of documentation, just because there's erasure does not mean that there was not a presence, right, in our work. And so that is my charge, and that's what honestly keeps me going in doing this work, even in the heavier days, the challenging days, because I'm not going to lie, it is. It is. But the work is still so worthwhile. It continues to motivate me to tell the story. So,
yeah. One of the things that I love so much about the script, I've never seen the show live. I hope I get to one day, but I did get a chance to read the script. And I love that you and Jefferson come out of character at the end and sort of challenge the audience as yourselves to think about these issues. I think that's really neat.
We try to leave you with a little something, a little something to just, just think about this connection of what, music as one idea of how it can bring people together, but also, you really get to the core and just try to see them as individuals. And we've unpacked a lot, slavery and other things throughout the piece, but, trying to give us all this base thing, and hopefully that moves people to just, go further and continue to have some conversations, and more importantly, take some action in their own lives and community.
So later we're going to see a scene from Music That Binds, and I wonder if you all would set that up for us and kind of describe it.
You go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, this scene that you all will see, it's really special because it really is a moment for Jenny and I just to connect as storytellers, really, in this moment, So at this point of the play, Jupiter is no longer serving as Jefferson's direct manservant, and Jupiter is really interacting directly with the audience to give them an insight into what daily life is like for him now that he's no longer a manservant, but he's now the head of the stables at Monticello. And Jupiter paints this picture of the rhythm, the musicality, as I spoke about earlier in our conversation, about how there's music embedded in everything, right on Mulberry Road. And so Jupiter will paint this picture, and he also might ask for some participation from the viewers. So all of you watching at home, feel free to join in and help him out. But Jenny then beautifully accompanies Jupiter in this piece with the fiddle, and you'll get to hear what song Jenny plays, but it really makes the entire piece sing, and it's a beautiful collaboration that Jenny and I have in the piece as Jupiter, and Jenny, of course, as a musician.
Every day, the sun slowly starts to rise and the symphony begins, and the rooster calls. It means it's time for a new day on the road. And I always wonder, what will this day bring? But the answers are often all around you because life is always saying something. The question is, are you ready to listen? Now, a lot has changed, and I no longer attend Master Jefferson directly. My duties now are to work the stables and tend to the horses. And the horses are always excited to see me. So when the sun rises, to the stable I go. And it's just me and them. We just gets to be. And then the music. It washes over Mulberry Road, And every slave begins their day keeping perfect time. And please know that when I say music, I'm not talking about those violins playing European dance tunes. I'm thinking about banjos and Negro fiddlers like Cy Gillett. You know, he's one of the best in all of Virginia. It's the music of our lives. It's in all the work that we do. It's rhythm, survival, communication, unity. From dawn till dusk, the road will tell you a story. All you have to do is listen. I can hear now, can you? The horses trotting against the dirt, and they sound like they have a lot of energy. Now, all of you over here, I need your help. You just keep that energy up for me. Just follow what I do. All right, here we go. Uh-huh. That's it. Now we're starting. Now you keep that energy up. I'm counting on all of you. The day has just begun and there's plenty to do. Now all of you right here, I need you all to really take that hammer to the metal. It's time to get to work. And just know, as long as the sun is up, the music will continue. So you all follow me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're really going. You hear that rhythm? We're all together. Now you all got to keep that pace up. I need to go down to the nailery and check on the younger ones. They got to make so many 10-penny nails, and there's a high quota each and every day. Now you all, counting on you. Make sure you keep that pace up. Keep it going. Keep that energy. Now we all got to work together just like this. You ready? Here we go. That's it. Now you all keep it going. Now as the day moves, the rhythm shifts and morphs. But it's all right because we're all together. Now, you know, that's the only way we're going to make it through. Here come the barrels from the Cooper. Good day. I see the Wagners coming, rolling in the logs and the weavers are back there, making all the linens for the summer months. And there's humming and singing and messages all around. Is someone coming? Is anyone going? Clank, clonk, sigh, cry, heave, breathe, and then the music stops. Another day at Mulberry Row.
Hello, my name is Wayne Hill. I play the violin and gourd banjo here for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Our earliest known documentation for a gourd banjo or gourd banjar comes to us from a physician named Mr. Sloan. He relates seeing them played in Jamaica during the late 17th century, and he referred to them as strum strumps, like strum, but with a PS at the end, strum strumps. The tune that I played a bit ago is a dance tune from the 17th century. We don't know if Mr. Sloan heard that particular tune or not. It's certainly possible that he would have heard that tune. This particular gourd banjo or banjar that I'm playing was made by Pete Ross, he's an expert in the field of early banjo making. He's based out of Baltimore, and he copied the instrument that's in the painting titled The Old Plantation. The Old Plantation painting is one that we have at our art museum here at Colonial Williamsburg. And this particular gourd banjo is a copy of the Banjar that's being played by the gentleman in that particular painting. And just to go over a couple of the features of the gourd banjo, we have the gourd body itself, and it has an animal skin that's nailed to it. The fingerboard itself goes right through the gourd, the body, and another defining feature are the wooden friction pegs, as many other stringed instruments have, like the violin, for example. And from the 18th century, we have quite a few references to the gourd banjo in journals and in runaway ads. There were quite a few enslaved persons of African descent that played the violin, and several of them also played the gourd banjo during the 18th century. And I'll read a couple of entries from journals to begin with. This first one comes to us from Philip Vickers Fithian. He was the teacher for the Carter family here in Virginia, and in 1774 he relates that, quote, "This evening in the schoolroom, several Negroes and Ben and Harry are playing on a banjo and dancing," end quote. And it's useful to keep in mind when we're reading sources from the 18th century, some of the language we may now find to be offensive, and it's useful to keep in mind that when I'm relating this information, these are right out of the sources from the 18th century. Here's another one. This is from Nicholas Creswell, also from 1774. He writes, quote, "Mr. Bailey and I went to see a Negro ball, Sundays being the only days they have to themselves. They generally meet together and amuse themselves with dancing to the banjo. This musical instrument is made of a gourd, something in the imitation of a guitar, with only 4 strings and played with the fingers in the same manner." And I'll mention a couple of runaway ads now, or relate a couple of those. One from Maryland from 1749, a bit earlier, relates that, quote, "A 25-year-old mulatto musician named Prince ran away and took with him an old fiddle and plays very well on the banjar." And in this case, you may have noticed I used the term banjar. The terms banjo, banjar, banjar, gourd banjo, on show up in different places during the 18th century and some in the 17th century. And from the Virginia Gazette, published right here in Williamsburg, where we are filming right now, this is from 1775. This relates, quote, "Charles, formerly living near Williamsburg, plays exceedingly well on the banjar and generally carries one with him," end quote. So I'll play a tune now that's titled "Pompey Ran Away." This particular tune was published in Scotland, and it's believed to have been composed by an enslaved person of African descent, perhaps a fiddler, violinist, or perhaps even a banjar player, perhaps both. This particular tune in that publication is listed as being a Virginia Negro jig. Thank you for your time. I'll finish up with "Pompey Ran Away."
I'm Loren Ludwig. I'm here with the Early Music Access Project at Colonial Williamsburg, and I'm here with Dylan Pritchett, who's a creative lead with the Black Music Program. And Dylan, I'd love to hear a bit about that program and sort of what your activities at Colonial Williamsburg these days are.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. My journey today started 40 years ago. The Black Music Program today is a program that is designed to mainly entertain and educate the school groups that come into town. There's also efforts to have that program offered to the general public. And that's the next phase, I think, of where the Black Music Program will go, because it's been quite a while since the Black Music Program has been offered to the general public. When the Black Music Program first started, that's exactly what it was. It was a program designed to talk about African-American music in the 18th century and to give the visitors an opportunity to end the day and learn something. It was a program that was in the evening or afternoon, like 5:30, and it was an opportunity to talk about African-American music in the very beginnings, when the Africans would congregate and what that music sounded like, the rhythms that they'd play, the music that they'd sing, the reason that they would sing. And so in the very beginning, there was a lot of research that was done and put together to try to explain the music that was being performed. Now, the interesting thing is, in the very beginning, obviously, this music wasn't written down. And there were museums that had tackled or were beginning to tackle the interpretation of African Americans in the 18th century. But musically, that was kind of ground setting for Colonial Williamsburg and in the museum world. It was just the right time, and I'm speaking of the 80s, mid 80s is when there was a lot of social programming going on. People wanted to know about how people got from A to B, women's history, and characters were going on. So it was the right time to really talk about really the development of American music, both Black and white.
What were some of the particular sort of musical traditions that you wanted to foreground with this, or that you feel sort of speak to this space and to the history here?
I think that the music that you would hear of African Americans in Williamsburg specific, it's going on off of Duke of Gloucester Street. It's not on the main street. Might be a cook in the back that's singing a song. Might be a mother that's singing a lullaby to their kid. It might be a woodworker who has a rhythmic kind of work going on, who's singing a song or phrases to a song. So it would not have been a lot of the type of music that's ensemble music. Matter of fact, that's the best way to put it. You might hear a lullaby. Go to sleep, baby, baby, don't you cry. Mama gonna buy you a rocking horse, baby, don't you cry. Baby, don't you cry, little baby, don't you cry. Mama gonna buy you a rocking chair. You might hear some of that, but it might not be during the day. And that lullaby song is sung by a Black woman to a white child as well. So the white child ends up going, whatever, And so there's some transference of this music that's happening where you really don't think it's really happening.
And that sort of represents something of a contrast, right, with the sort of white colonial music that's been happening here for a long time. Mm-hmm. The governor's music and other folks that are singing in taverns, where it's really, as I understand it, largely about kind of entertainment and sort of social music making. And it sounds like you were reaching for other ways that music existed among the people that were here.
Yeah. There's a, you brought to mind rhythm. in the very beginning, we played a rhythm called Gahu. Gahu was taught to us by a gentleman that worked at the African Museum, at the Smithsonian Museum. And this rhythm, so that's the basic rhythm. When he taught it to us, he taught us that that rhythm sets the pace for the music, not the drum, but that rhythm. Now, if you listen to music from South America, if you listen to any, that's there.
Yeah, sounds like a clave.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And so, you know, at the time we weren't thinking about it, but then the more we started playing it, the more people kind of heard that rhythm and they said, oh, I know that, you know, and that was the cool thing about Gahu, is that what it did was it showed that that rhythm is important, and that everybody that has drums mainly as an accompaniment to the bell basically are from the African diaspora, and that there's a merging of musical traditions of those people from the African diaspora, Jamaican music, music in South America, Mexico, you know, wherever African people went, that happens to be there, and the drum is also there. The drum in European music was not as important. You can do without a drum.
Yeah, that sounds fair. Yeah.
You know, yeah. But the thing about it is you really can't do without rhythm. And that rhythm then is major in European music as well, but it is the main focus of African music. So Africans coming to America knew about that rhythm, and they'd hear that rhythm and say, well, you know, I know a drum rhythm to that. They'd play something on the drum. Then somebody else would say, well, I know a shaker day rhythm. And then next thing you know, they're playing music, and they're playing rhythm, but that rhythm can't be pinpointed to a place in Africa. But Africans understood rhythm, and what they end up with was a uniquely African-American music that's made up of all these different peoples.
It makes me wonder, sort of in the, you know, both in the early days of the Black Music Program and also sort of ongoing, sort of how you all were thinking or experiencing the kind of syncretic aspect of that, right? That it was aspects of African culture sort of filtered through the experience of enslaved people, or you know, these European elements. Kind of what was that like to try to think through or represent the mixtures that are part of American music?
There were a group of people, Black and white, who were looking for ways to incorporate each other's music into their thinking. Because the instrumentation was different, it's hard. For example, knowing that the bell is the main instrument, you got to have a bell to play African music. That bell doesn't fit into Mozart. That bell doesn't fit Haydn. So the bell's out. Mm-hmm. That drum, if it was a boron, maybe we could do something, but we can't use the djembe. That shaker there, we don't have anything like that. That's out. Let's see, what do we have? We got a flute. Well, maybe we can get a flute in here, but that's not it. Hold on. The violin. They playing it like a fiddle. It's a little same instrument, but different style. So maybe we can slip that fiddle in here. Where's Jesse? You know, and then Jesse comes in and Jesse learns what's on the European side. And then he goes back and he plays fiddle and dance, and it's a little different. So, you know, that's a little different. And I just said him, but Simon Gilliard was a gentleman who was a fiddler who played at the balls at the palace. But I'm sure that when he got home, he took that same music and did a little something to it. So there's a little borrowing there. Man,
I love that you brought up Simon Gilliard in this moment, because there's in one of the accounts of Simon Gilead, of Cy Gilead playing this is in Richmond a little bit later. You probably know this account, but it talks about him both playing like French dance music and playing a piece called a congo. You know, and a congo, my understanding of congo is sort of the term that white people use to describe music that sounded African to them. They called it a congo.
Right.
You know,
right.
So absolutely, Cy Gilead was mixing those.
Yeah, Cy's the man. As a matter of fact, I can't. There are accounts of black fiddlers, but Simon Gilead is just named simply because of who he played for. And when you think about it, everybody's not playing at the governor's palace. I mean, what kind of repertoire do you need to play at the governor's palace? And where did he come from? I mean, who said, I know somebody, he's black, but I know somebody, and it's probably like, how does he know this music? Which is interesting because during the days of the Black Music Program, we had a fiddler who was a violinist. And she was a self-taught violinist who couldn't read music, which was just shocking, I mean, it's like, what do you mean you don't read music? She said, I listen to the music and I learn it like that. And everybody nodded their head like you did, but everybody was kind of like, I don't know.
Wow.
How do you learn chamber music by the ear?
Wow.
But she sat down with these people that I'm speaking of, people worked at the music teacher's room at the time. And they played something for her and said, okay, you want to play? She said, yeah, I'll play. And she played what they were playing. And they were kind of looking around going, what's this? And so there are what we would call geniuses, which Simon Gilead probably was. Where did he learn to play music? Where did he learn to read music? Who taught him that to the point where he's playing at the governor's palace? Mm-hmm. Or was he even taught? Or was he like this young lady her name was Lamatris Jones? Was he like Lamatris? How many people were around like that? And, that's interesting because the question also becomes, in the 18th century, were there people like that? Were there a lot of people like that? Were there people who could not necessarily write the music or notate the music, but people who knew the music well enough to be able to hear it and replay it, and then replay it the way they want to hear it, black and white? Were there whites who would go out, as they did with Story, and listen to a black person tell a story, play music, and then reinterpret it to their group of people in their tradition? And I'm sure that there were. We know that Saturday night, there were Saturday night gatherings of black folk. And the law stated that no more than, no more than 5 could assemble unless a white's present. So there were whites that were there. Black and white folks shared music. Now, getting really back to what you originally asked, Williamsburg is different because we're talking about one town, one place, 50% black. This isn't like a community of people. Well, it's a city, it's a town, but this is the city. These are different types of people here than you would find in rural areas. But once you go 20 miles that way, 30 miles that way, once you go across the James River, the York River, you're getting into communities where people are sharing music. They're sharing the town. And there's not as much division amongst people due to social status. So the music is flowing a little bit more there. There's more sharing going on there. Musically as well as culturally. The best example is Amazing Grace. How we know Amazing Grace started, but then it evolves into something different. And it ends up with, Amazing Grace shall always be my song of praise. For it was grace that bought my liberty. Ends up with a little Danny boy up in there. And you're going, where'd Danny boy come from? That's the merging of the music. That's where you take something like Amazing Grace, which everybody still sings, and it ends up in a historical context with a Danny boy sound and a little vibrato. And so that's music. That's the beauty of music. But if you don't know what you're hearing, and you're really not listening for vibrato, you're really not listening to melody, where that melody comes from. You're not listening to the rhythm, which is the African side of it. Then you're missing an educational opportunity. And and if there's any parting word, it's really comes from an African proverb that says, "Not to know is bad, not to wish to know is worse." And there are a lot of things that we really don't know what to ask, but not to ask is just as bad. And where did it come from? Why did you do that? What would you do different? All those are good questions to ask. And when it comes to music, I don't think we ask that enough about where those lyrics come from. Why are you singing those lyrics? What's that rhythm? Is that from something else? What's the root of that song? Where did that song come from? Whether it be the lyrics or the rhythm or the melody. And what we might find is that there's a lot of borrowing that has happened musically. Borrowed from black folk, borrowed from white folk, borrowed from Irish folk, borrowed from the church, borrowed from the sea. Borrowing is good, but not to know where that root is really doing a disservice to the music. The one thing that has survived all the years, and probably will, is Gahu, which was the very first rhythm that was taught. There were 6 different instruments, but these three can get us through. And I'll teach it to you. The bells rhythm is real simple. Now, the easiest way to remember a rhythm, put words to it, and this is what have been telling people that we teach it to. Because we have the kids that'll come up, adults come up, and we tell them to say the words, "I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home." And that's it. Now, people want to play this. Because they want some variety. But we always tell them that the rhythm would be consistent, and you play one bell because it's the sound of the rhythms coming together that would recreate the spoken voice. So if we were in Ghana, the Ava-speaking people, once they play this, it would say there's going to be a party tonight. So it's the rhythms of all of the instruments and the sound of all of the instruments that when it comes together, sounds like a spoken voice. And it would say there's going to be a party tonight. So that's when Africans say that the music talks to them. It's really talking. So that's why for Gahu, that's the rhythm that you play. Now, the Shekere rhythm, and there are 2 types of Shekere. You have one, they're both gourds. This one has some seed pods around it, kiln-dried okra. And it sounds different than that one. That has sea beads around it. And so with the Shekere, you hit what you say, and you say leg, hand, leg, leg, hand, leg, leg, hand, leg, leg, hand, leg. That's real loud. Excellent. Excellent. And the log drum is really a hollowed log, and it has sounds, different sounds on both sides. Hit both sides. Right. And with that, you play a heartbeat. Now, what happens is we all start, I'll start, and I'll bring you guys in. Ready?
Okay.
Leg, hand, leg, leg, hand, leg, leg, hand, leg, leg, hand, leg, and ba-ba, ba-ba, ba-ba. Now that you got that down, we're gonna play it at the right speed.
Uh-oh.
Okay? All right? Since you're seasoned professionals. Leg, hand, leg, leg, hand, leg, leg, hand, leg, ba-ba, 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 ba-ba. Excellent. Now there's some other instruments. There'd be a drum that go ba-ba-doom, 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 ba-ba-doom. And then there's another drum that goes ding, 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 ding. The next thing you know, we start dancing. Because we don't have on the proper shoes, we can't do the dance.
Uh-oh.
So, you guys ready? Excellent.
All right, we're back live, and we're having a good chuckle at our lack of drumming ability over here. And we are eagerly awaiting your questions, so please put that in the Facebook chat, and we're excited to answer those questions for you. And I'm going to start it off with a question for Jamar. I'm curious, I know that you all have performed this show. I have just forgotten the name of the show. Help me out.
The music that binds.
Yes, I had something else in my head. It was wrong. I'm glad I didn't say it. So you've performed, had a couple of performances, and you have some coming up. What has the audience reception been?
You know, it's been really nice. I also would love to invite anyone, if you, a little promo, please join us for the show 3 more times the next 3 Tuesdays at 7:30 right here at the Palace, the Governor's Palace at Colonial Williamsburg at 7:30 until June 22nd. But the audience reception it's been really nice. You know, I think, we're outside in the evening, right?
Yes.
So we have natural sound happening with us. And so the audience, I think, are very engaged with that. They've been curious to learn more about Cy Gillett, because as you all probably saw in the monologue, I do a brief nod to Cy Gillett, who was a Negro fiddler of the 18th century, and there's been some curiosities about him. People have been curious about Jupiter's story, but largely people have been very intrigued about the merger of music and storytelling and performance, right? Because, music it's always telling a story, right? That there is a purpose to it. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when you weave that with these historical figures and we just embed it throughout the entire experience, I think that's what people are really struck by. So they're learning, they're entertained, and so we get to check a few boxes there, which are really nice. And the animals have been working in our favor, and the insects. So they're offering a lovely underscore to our music. So shout out to I don't know what you are, the hummingbirds, dragonflies, whoever it is, and the trains too. So they're around. So it's been nice.
I guess we don't have the cicadas down here.
No, not yet. So hopefully the cicadas will show up before it's all over.
Drown it out.
Yeah.
It's great to hear about some performance that's happening now.
Yeah.
And Dylan, when we talked a month ago, the episode that we just watched, we were talking a lot about kind of the last couple decades of the Black music program. And I want to put you on the spot and kind of ask what have you been kind of listening to or engaging with recently? Kind of where have you ended up here in the last year?
Ooh, that's an excellent question. What have I I tell you, because that's an interesting question.
You know, when people ask me that question, I can't even think of any music, let alone the music I've been listening to. So
But there's a lot of stuff that's rattling around. I mean, when it comes to, for example, African American music, whether it's 18th, 19th, 20th century, I've been, and I just mentioned to Jamar, something's been in my head about very incidental music, whistling, hand clapping, children's games that teach hand clapping, nonsensical games, things that we play, things, for example, my mother, who passed away quite a while back, I asked my mother to sing me a song, and she started going, "Oh, last night and the night before, a nickel and penny knocked at the door. I went over to let them in, blah, 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 blah." And then it's something, something, turn around. No, something, something, touch the ground. It was a jump rope song. And she said, "Oh, I remember that." But she couldn't remember it. She remembered it just as much as I just remembered it. But the thing about it is, some things we call music that's not written down on a sheet, but it's important. It's music. There's an employee here who's an excellent whistler, and he just whistles. And but it's music. And so that's what's kind of been in my head, not necessarily something to research, but then there's, looking back at the research, there are accounts of mighty whistlers, mighty singers. I'm thinking of Africans who would have what they call mighty singers, who would call people to prayer. They were called mighty singers. And those people ended up here, or at least that tradition ended up here. And plus shape note singing, the kind of thing that's still going on in the Sea Islands and also by the Geechee culture, that kind of stuff. I mean, I love that stuff, but you have to understand it in order to understand it. It's sort of like listening to African vocal music, true African vocal music, and not know what it should sound like. Because as soon as you hear it, it's like, and you're going, "Oh my goodness, that's so flat. Where's the vibrato?" But no, that's what it is. And once you understand it, it's like listening to Indian music and watching Indians dance, natives, however you want to say it. Watch them dance and notice that when you listen to the drum, it's the feathers. Somebody said, "Watch the feathers." They said, "Listen to the music and watch the feathers." And it's the motion of the feathers. And I said, I ain't never really noticed the feathers. But then when you sit there and watch it and then listen to it with the music, it begins to make sense. And I know I'm kind of going off the rail a little bit, but I think that when it comes to music, we want something on a piece of paper written down, or, where'd you get that? We want it researched. But the most common music, we never really thought about. That little ditty that grandma would always walk around the house with. My father used to walk around, "On the bayou, son of a gun, we gonna have some fun on the bayou." I said, "What the hell is he singing?" Excuse me. I said, "What's he singing? What's that song?" And come to find out, it is a real song. But that's all my father sung, because I think that's all he knew. But I think it's that cool kind of music. It doesn't have beginning, middle with a bridge. It's just cool stuff. That's what's been on my mind. Good thing something wasn't really on my mind, didn't it?
Yeah. There you are.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, absolutely. For our first question from the audience, Melissa, who is visiting in July, was curious about what type of programming she might encounter then. Are the programs that were represented in this particular live stream going to still be in session, or what can we expect?
Well, I know, thanks for asking that, Melissa. So seasonally and sometimes monthly, the programs are often shifting here all the time, and new things are happening. And so in July, as far as music, I know we'll have a program. It's more of a play created equal, but there are some elements to African music. And hey, there you are. And there's some elements to African music and spirituals. We'll also play along with that in this piece that is an examination of the Declaration of Independence. But I know Music That Binds won't be playing, so that's all right now, but I encourage you to go to the Colonial Williamsburg page, and you can also look on the landing page about the African American experience, and a lot of times that will have various programs and things that are happening with various departments, so I hope that helps.
Doug writes in with the following. As I watch this, I'm keenly aware that we are seeing a disproportionate amount of white people talking about black music in America. Could you speak a little bit about Colonial Williamsburg's efforts to be more inclusive and truly representing the musical experience of the enslaved?
Well, I'll kind of take that one. But, you know, African American music at Colonial Williamsburg first began as a specific program. The whole idea was to introduce really the museum world to it. And I think you would be hard pressed to find a black music program at a museum today. You might find African American music being sung or done at a museum, but not necessarily programmatically as much as and as widespread. So the music that you hear today comes from in many different departments, rather than in the beginning when it was centralized in one department. So over the years, and we're talking about many years. I mean, we're talking about almost 40 years, really 30 plus, 40 years. We're talking about how things have really changed. As for whites, there's no problem with that. Black people have been interpreting white history for a while. So why not, it's just like a sharing of it. Half the population of Williamsburg was black, African American people. So does that mean that if you were to come here, that every other white employee should mention that half the population was black? Should half the people that you come into contact with be black? If we're going to interpret American history, we include everyone, and everyone is included in telling that story. Now, when we've taken a leap is when we have a white actor or actress that's singing a song sung by a black person that they learned as a child. And then at the end, that's talked about. Or a program where the black lady is singing to a white child, and in the next scene, that white child is playing with a black child, and then in the next scene, that black child is now going with the white child that married a white male who moved to Maryland, and then to show what their relationship is and have music permeating that way. Now we might be getting into some issues. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's a shared, music is the one equalizer. Music is the one thing that's not black or white. And as long as we're sharing the information and having a discussion of how do we use it, then that's different. Simon Gilead was a fiddle player, and until somebody can play the banjar, the claw and hammer, called the strum as well, when a black person can play it, fine. But just because a white can play it, finer, it's one step. But then somebody needs to take that up, within the African American community, and that might be where the but challenges do come in, because this is not something that the interpretation of African American history, first of all, for an African American to be doing it is a little bit more challenging than a white who wants to talk about a patriot during the 18th century. It's challenging to do the job and then to put music on it, where people begin to think that music is entertainment. Then now we have a black person that's entertaining themselves through music. And that's not the case. So there's some education that has to come along with it as well.
And I just think that's when you really think about the idea of space and context, how important that is. You know, when you know, whether it's here at this institution or at various places, to make sure that the framing of everything is really set in a way that people understand what's going on, understand the history, understand the origins, understand the culture, and that so that things can't get lost in translation of that music, and that we're very intentional, right? That's the one thing I hope, at least in my work and understanding things of what I'm delivering and what I'm a part of, the intentionality behind it all of like, what's the story that we're telling, even in the music, and who's doing it and whatnot. So I think it's an ongoing conversation, as it should be. It's happening.
You know, I want to add something else, because it's very interesting. This morning, had a similar type of discussion on a most high plane, someone on a whole nother subject. But sometimes, you know, we're placed in situations where you either do the right thing or you do nothing. And sometimes, and thank you for the question, because sometimes I'm sure that white folks might say, I got to find a black person to do that, because I can't do it. I won't be received well. But if a black person says it, fine. And the problem is sometimes it goes unsaid, because they're trying to find the right black person to do. But sometimes you might have to say it first, and somebody has to hear it first and say, I can do that.
Do some of the work.
Do some of the work.
You know, I want to jump in there too, because that, you know, I am the history of African American music is so powerful, and coming up as an American, it's been such a important part of kind of how I've come to know myself, how I've kind of, you know, just sort of come to be an American, and honoring that and studying it and, you know, helping learn about it, et cetera. That seems like a great way of helping honor that tradition. And as a white person, a key thing to be careful of is that I'm never trying to somehow represent the black experience, or in my talking about that culture, to know that I will never have access to that experience or that history from a lived perspective. But in terms of sharing the knowledge and doing the research and thinking about it and talking about it and making the music in certain contexts, that to me seems like such an important thing for white people to be honoring and studying and sharing and sort of helping make visible this incredibly rich tradition that has been sort of underrepresented in certain spaces. So, you know.
It makes you think, if I could use an example, this idea of, imagine if it's curriculum, right? When you think of school, sometimes, at least I can say just in my experiences, sometimes the focus is always, the expectation is that you have a Eurocentric understanding, right? Including music, as if this is the base. In African American, Indian, anything else is like an elective or a possible addendum to it. However, now, no, it needs to be the base for everybody to engage and interact with all these things, knowing who you are and where you're coming from. However, everybody is the standard. You know, that's when we begin to shift and decenter the Eurocentric idea of what music should be, and, like, you know, covering the whole landscape, right? And so that everybody can be a part of it.
And part of that entails people of all different identities engaging with the cultural productions of people of all different identities. There's a very complex and exploitative history here. I don't want to sweep that under the carpet, but at the same time, sort of honoring and engaging with these different traditions seems to me the way forward to kind of to decenter Europeanness as the, you know, where it's been at the heart of the kind of American imagination in a very damaging way, I think.
I mean, it's impossible to talk about American music without talking about black musicians and music. Even if you're
slavery.
Yeah. Even if you're talking about European music, because if you went to a dance in the colonial period, it was a black fiddler who was making that music for the white dance. I got to thinking about the fact that the vast majority of times that white audiences were hearing dance music, European dance music, they were hearing it by a black band or a black fiddler, and that black musicians were really setting the standard of what those tunes sounded like in America.
I was sitting here watching, and I thought to myself, I wonder if people notice that Jenny is there. How many women would have been fiddlers playing at the palace? So as we're sitting here, listening to Jamar and seeing Jenny sitting there, and then when she started playing, I wonder how many people said, "Wait a minute, would there have been women playing in the back?" Because we're focusing on women. And if the people that didn't do that, was that because she was white? So it's natural for whites to play the fiddle. So why is Simon Gilead so odd? But if we have to go to the time, and I was wondering, okay, I'm at the palace watching Simon Gilead play. Am I watching Simon a fiddler, or am I watching Fiddler Simon? Because if I'm watching Simon Gilead the fiddler, I'm watching a black fiddler. But if I'm watching a fiddler Simon Gilead, I'm watching a fiddler who happens to be black. And I'm pretty sure that they just watching Simon. Simon tearing it up, man. But then when Simon leaves there and goes to the back, Simon ain't playing the violin no more. He be playing, what a talent. What a talent to be able to play to play music that the governor can dance by. And then, go in the back. So he must have been very revered, highly revered, but he must have had some stories to tell as well.
This leads me to a question for both of y'all about performing in Colonial Williamsburg over the years, and there's talking kind of about this history of black performers entertaining white audiences, right? And there's a way a kind of uncharitable person could look at these modern performances, for example, that y'all are doing, and say, oh, isn't this just the same? Isn't this just more of black performers kind of? And I know that there are mixed race audiences here. I know that it's a more complicated than I'm framing it, but I wonder kind of how do you think about or sort of operate within that legacy as performers today?
Yeah, no, that's like, I feel like I can tell we both took a
because I don't know about today, but I will say in the very beginning, as I had said earlier, research was most important. So all the music was put into context. So education was first and foremost. Educate the audience, let them know what they're going to hear, and how that, whether or not that is the approach now, would be difficult unless a character were to break. So I can't answer for today and now, but that research, they would have to understand the music because it was more controlled. They didn't just happen upon people doing a musical performance. It might with music, but
and I'll be happy to tag on. So, in my department, I'm part of a member of the actor-interpreter unit here, and so we present a lot of stage presentations, and a lot of times these things are embedded with music, and the music that binds. It was my first time in such a large way creating with the governor's music ensemble, right? But for us, kind of like what Dylan was saying, it certainly is research-based, right? But then you also take your theatrical techniques and skill set to create a story based off of the research that you have, and we build performances off of that. So that's always at the base. Now, as far as you're saying, what are people taking away from it? If it's largely white audiences and this idea of you're witnessing, I feel like there's often conversations, whether it's with music, or just with people portraying enslaved people. It's, I've been a part of a lot of conversations about this idea of putting Black trauma on display, right? And how do you handle that, especially with the legacy of slavery and the legacy of this music we know operated in so many different ways, right? Music was a healing thing. It was a release. Music was also a form of communication and a way to release messages. Also, we know there were attempts to stifle those music and communication for the enslaved people. And, truthfully, there are times where I find myself on stage, and it could be a show and we are singing some spirituals or, these things are influenced, and it is a vastly white audience. And I have those moments in my head, I'm thinking, I know what I feel, and I know what I know, but what are you gathering? And sometimes you're not going to know, and sometimes it's this idea of a seed, and people are going to walk away, and you're not sure what they're going to take away from it. But it is a dance, and I'll say, I won't speak for any of my colleagues, but for me, sometimes it's a weird thing to emotionally carry with you, because it's like, who am I doing it for, right? Because that's something to wrestle with, and I don't feel like there's a smooth way to detach yourself from that, because you're trying to represent these ancestors the best that you can with the research you have, the knowledge, and you're trying to put it forth for this audience, an audience that doesn't look like you sometimes. And so where do you go? Where do you take that? But I think for me, I have a commitment to the story for the people who oftentimes are erased or unacknowledged and things, and you take what you have, know the best you can, and use my gifts and talents to help tell those stories, whether it's through song, and then make sure. That's why we have post-show conversations. You're saying, like, how do you get the clarity? We have those debriefs to facilitate conversations, to let people know. And of course, the pandemic kind of altered some of those things, because you can't have necessarily close conversations, but we remain available to really dissect. And also we try to intentionally structure our pieces that it's not like I'm going to data dump everything throughout the show, because nobody wants to see a play like that. However, everything, every conversation in the show and what the characters are saying, what their the objectives within the piece, it's going to tell the research and tell the story to hopefully, to make sure everything is framed the best way possible.
The interpretation of African American history at Colonial Williamsburg, some things haven't changed. The angst that employees sometimes feel because of the subject matter that you're trying to, first of all, internalize and then let people hear and see. That's not normal. It's not a normal process. Now, if I were at the Palace, I'm talking about one thing, and if I'm at the tavern, I'm talking about another. But for the African American interpreter, there's another level of difficulty because of what people bring and what they don't bring in their knowledge of what you're doing and what you're trying to do. And I'm saying that because throughout the years, that has never changed. As a matter of fact, it may have gotten worse because of the timing and what has happened. And it comes in spurts. What music does is music gives that interpreter an understanding of what that music did. And if the music could take them away just for a moment, they would sing. If music this weekend at a Saturday night gathering of getting together and just dancing on Saturday night would do it, they'd go. And so that music becomes more than a nice minuet in the Palace Ballroom. It becomes survival. And so that music, hopefully, that transcends time and gives the interpreter something, if not a link to the ancestors, to be able to do it. So, in a nutshell, for the visitor, they're gonna hear the music, but it won't necessarily mean to them what it does to the person that's doing it. And it might, it might just be performance. But after that performance, then it's solace, because they have represented what was so important for those people to continue. And that's the importance of continuing to do it. Sorry.
So, believe it or not, we have reached the moment where we only have time for one last question. And actually, for this last question, I was wondering if each of you might be able to provide just a little bit of perspective based on your experiences with either Early Music Access Project and with Colonial Williamsburg, on what your thoughts are for the future of African American music programming and sort of what are the next steps.
I think that that's a question that that the viewers, the people watching, can answer, because Colonial Williamsburg listens to their viewers, they listen to their visitors, they listen to you more than they would listen to anybody on the staff, because you're the ones that come to see whatever. If you want to see X, Y, and Z sing on ABC Street, you need to write it down as a comment. And as a matter of fact, you can put VWXYZ, that you want to see all of them on the street, on ABC and D Street. And they might find funding for it. And, you know, I'm saying it tongue in cheek, but it is what you want to see. I mean, their programs could be thought up in 5-10 minutes, and people will get so excited, look, I got music for it. You know, they'll find music for it, find a director by 8 o'clock. Jenny will be playing the music by tomorrow. But if it ain't something that you want to see, there's no reason to do it. So, I mean, I understand the future, and, you know, we can say, well, we're going to, but it's what you want to see. And when it comes to African-American music and programming, it's definitely a plus to write down what it is you would want to see, because there's a talented enough staff to do it, and there's music that can be found. And not only that, but, you know, people fund stuff like that. You know, the Black Music Program, and the staffing for it was through grant money from, you know, AT&T years and years ago. So you never know. But, you know, the power is in your hands, really. So, but I guess what you want to hear is this answer, which is just continuing to do research, continuing to be true to the music, but more importantly, continuing to be true to those who sung the songs, danced the dances, and you know, did perform the music on an everyday basis.
That's well put. And yeah, all I can offer is just openness and advocating for this work and these stories, and not shying away from it. And that's I would say internally and externally, not shying away from it.
I would say for Early Music Access Project, if there's one good thing that came out of a year plus of pandemic, is that it caused us to pause in the middle of thinking about Black music in America and keep that research going instead of moving to the next project. And it's caused us to make new connections, think about things in a different way, be able to center Black artists in what we're doing, and has opened up the door for a bunch of new programming in the future that I don't think we knew was possible. And so we're really excited for this to become an ongoing thing, to be talking about American music as Black music as American music.
Well, thank you so much, Jamar, Dylan, David, and Loren, for sharing your expertise, experiences, and perspectives with us today. And thank you for this exciting opportunity to collaborate together as Early Music Access Project and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. This has really been a fascinating conversation to listen into. Now, as we do finish up, we would like to take this opportunity to thank all of those who are viewing from home. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank our donors. Programs like this are made possible by the generous support of viewers like you. And to learn more about how you can contribute to our programming, please follow the link in the comments section below or visit our website at www.colonialwilliamsburg.org. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to having you join us this coming Tuesday at 2 p.m. for our next live stream, Trades Tuesday with the Blacksmith.